so, I mean, it's tragic. Uh, and, the impact on the wildlife means there's massive impact on the local communities.
If you've been following us, this podcast is a little different, as today we talk with Steve Brown, the former owner of Novara. Steve has been our mentor, advisor, remote engineer, and ice pilot over the last few years, and a good friend. Tells us about his adventures on Novara, our work together on the One Planet project, and the climate changes he's witnessed over the last 2 decades of high-latitude sailing.
Hey, Steve. Hey, great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
You're more than welcome.
We're so happy to see you, and we've known Steve for such a long time. He's been such a mentor for us. Yeah. Veronica, over to you.
So, Steve, tell us a little bit about Novara and when you owned her, what you did on board Novara.
Okay, yeah. So I bought Novara in 2014, having recently sold our previous boat, where Trish and I did a circumnavigation on that. But I wanted something that I could go on some adventures, some expeditions, and particularly to Antarctica and South Georgia. So I bought the boat in Camden, Maine, 2014. Did the sea trials in January in minus 16 degrees and snow on the boat. And then spent 2.5 months getting her ready before we left in June. And the only way to link in all of the bits that I really wanted to do was to sail all the way around the Americas. And being in Maine, the obvious thing to do was to go north first to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Labrador, across to Baffin Island, so into the Northwest Passage proper. And the first year got us around to Kodiak in the top of the Aleutian chain.
Was it that voyage that you won the Tillman Award for?
Yeah, the Northwest Passage part, I was awarded the OCC's Rambler Medal because we went through in quite a difficult ice year. And Tillman Medal was awarded for the complete circumnavigation of the Americas. So the Tillman was for the complete 5-year trip, really, 33,000 miles.
Wow, it's quite a distance, quite a record. And you have been very inspiring for us purchasing Novara, but it's more been about guardianship. Maybe, do you want to tell us about your ideas of guardianship around Novara?
Well, she's a very unique boat. She's really unusual, being the first of what then was only 3 aero-rig schooners in the world. So she was a very strong boat. She was built for the ice, so she was exactly the sort of boat I was looking for. I bought her from a second owner, so Barton. He was a great guy. He's become a fantastic friend. And so there was continuity there. There was people that was helping us saying, this is what the boat was built for. This is what she's capable of doing. And they also wanted to make sure that whoever bought it, in this case me, would actually use it for what it was built for. And part of my pitch for buying it was to send Barton my CV, which was mountaineering expeditions and sailing and my plans. And I said, if you want to, if you're looking for somebody to buy the boat and use it for what it was built for, then I'm your man. And that went down quite well. I got a few quid knocked off the price for that.
It strikes me that you had the same philosophy when we met you and came on board Novara and were looking at buying her as well.
The boat was put up for sale because the previous 5 years I'd been away from home a lot. I'm a husband and a father and grandfather, but the long absences were getting increasingly difficult. And so the decision was made to sell the boat. But again, like Barton and Thomas, I was looking for somebody that was going to use it. And, and so Nigel and I had a back and forth. And one of the things I'd planned to do with it, if I hadn't sold it, after I brought it back across the Atlantic, was to take it north into the Arctic and visit remote coastal communities and basically, to give them a voice, to record the impacts of climate change on their communities. I'd obviously seen a lot of the impact when we did the circumnavigation, particularly in the Caribbean and the Pacific, low-lying islands. I'd been tracking, the impact of climate change on wildlife for 40 odd years. And it struck me that it would be a good thing to do, um, to add into that the impact on these remote coastal communities. So I hadn't been to Greenland at that stage. So the plan was to go to Greenland to begin with, and then back through the Northwest Passage, talking to the Inuit communities. And so, when Nigel came along and with his climate change background, it just seemed a perfect match. And, that at the time it was before you guys were ready, et cetera, et cetera. So it struck me, it got you to see the benefits of the boat and also the wonders that were and still are in front of you. Then it would be an easy sales pitch.
Yeah, but I remember being totally let down because it was during COVID, right? And I saw the advert when I was doing my boat porn. And so I contacted you and we were backwards and forwards. And then I remember getting this really depressing email that, sorry, I've decided to take the boat off the market. And I'm like, oh no, there it goes. And then weirdly, 12 months later, out of the blue, you come back and say, hey, you're still interested in the boat? This must have been you sort of giving us time to get used to the idea. Because
Um,
that's when I said, yes, of course, without even talking to Veronica.
I remembered, I always had it in the back of my mind that you was interested, but the time wasn't right, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought, there's nothing to lose. And, I, I just had the impression that you were the right people to sell the boat to.
We had you guiding us up what was a very steep learning curve when we first took her over, and,
Still is.
yeah, but it's leveled off a little.
I think the good thing for me, that the clincher was the fact that, Nigel wanted to sail home to New Zealand. He would only do it if you sailed through the Northwest Passage. I had this idea that I could stay in touch with the boat, and obviously from a mentoring point of view, to get you up what was a very steep learning curve, 60,000 nautical miles maybe under my belt. And so, you guys had got far, far less than that. So there was other lessons. There were some basic lessons that you needed to learn, as well as everything to do with what is a complicated boat. She was built to do quite a lot of things. And when you do that, you build in complication.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about the learning curve, Steve, from your perspective, because Veronica's right. We could not have done this adventure without you every step of the way because we were literally jumped off into the abyss, into the deep end. I remember that one fateful conversation in a cafe in Poole. Do you remember
Oh,
that?
yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
I remember that. But they're tough conversations, but that's what friends do. Friends tell it as it is. And there's no point, uh, trying to hide the reality. And I had the impression that if we'd have carried on with the original plan in terms of the timing, I would have been getting off the boat in probably Newfoundland and leaving you in harm's way. And that wasn't something that I was prepared to do. And a friend of mine said when I bought it, it'll take you 5 years to get this boat the way that you want it to. And it still wasn't the way I wanted it to when I sold it to you.
Yeah, with under your guidance though, and I think now, touching wood, I think she's
Yeah.
now she's in a good shape. Certainly, when we went through the Northwest Passage, she showed her pedigree. We had no major issues. Everything was well maintained. All the systems worked, and I certainly have benefited from your insights and help, every step of the way. I remember calling from places like Lorient, Steve, the prop shaft's not working, or where is Steve? What's happened here? Help me.
Well, my grandkids, I mean, not many people phone me. They send me WhatsApps and emails and stuff. So every time my phone rang, they'd go, "It's Nigel."
with yet another with yet another panic question. Help, help.
Yeah, well, but that was part of the plan. That was part of the deal. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, Veronica, just wanted to say that this is the interesting thing about the custodianship, right? Because rather than just sell us the boat, wipe your hands, and say farewell, you've stayed with us both at a distance, but also like on the boat because you came through the Northwest Passage with us this time. You've stayed with us all the way along. And that, I think, is the measure of a custodian sort of relationship that we're in it together.
From my point of view, to make sure that you guys were okay on the boat. I knew the boat was okay. You could, it's bomb-proof, that thing. But, and I needed to make sure that you guys were okay. And then you started adding other people into the mix. So, some of the pressure was off, and the deal when we sold it was that I'd come through the Northwest Passage with you. So
So there's a couple of things for listeners who don't know what the conversation was about. Was our original plan was to go to Shetland, Faroes, Iceland, Greenland, and do what's called the Viking route to get to Newfoundland, where we would have a relaxing time before we then did the Northwest Passage the following season. But the conversation in pool was a reality check about our skills and our ability to do that, and we decided not to do it. So I remember that conversation hugely because it was a relief. I was frightened about doing that trip without necessary support, and as I look back, I think I just simply didn't have the sailing miles to be able to do it. Um, so I was really delighted when we made that decision to not do it. I think, Nigel, you had a different reaction.
I mean, yes, there was some disappointment, but I think it was the right thing to do to say, let's just give ourselves another year building up skill with Novara. You need to remember, or listeners may not be aware that we went from sailing a 32-foot plastic boat in the Solent to buying Novara and sailing a 60-foot, 30-ton ice-strengthened aero rig schooner um, th- across oceans and into some of the most challenging sailing parts of the world. And we did that within 3 years.
yeah, and
We,
and that was a learning curve before you take on, something like the Northwest Passage. Um, you need to be a long way up the learning curve, and going south was definitely the right thing to do because you got to know the boat intimately. By living on the boat, there's no better way.
You said originally that you bought Novara because you um, wanted to circumnavigate the Americas. That was the easiest way to get to everywhere that you wanted to see. When you went through the Northwest Passage in 2014 compared to when you came through with us, what differences did you notice?
Well, quite a few, really. I mean, it was different. Um, when I went through in 2014, I was still getting used to the boat. The crew had never been on the boat before, really. In 2025, when we went through, we had a very strong crew. In fact, the strongest crew I've ever sailed with. Um, and so, in many ways, that took some of the pressure off you guys as skipper. And we went a different way. So we went over to the Greenland side, which for me was great because I'd never been to Greenland and I thought it was wonderful. And I'll go back in the blink of an eye. Before I talk about conditions, I'll talk about the technology. When I went through in 2014, there was satellite communication, but I had a problem with the data side of it. So I went through with no weather and no ice data. So it was a real step out into the unknown. Ice conditions were severe that year. I mean, it's recognized as in the last 10, 15 years is probably one of the toughest years. So there was none of that communication with the outside world. Whereas this time, because of Starlink, people were on their smartphones the whole time. They were WhatsApping people and answering, and so there was a lot more technology. There was the drone, the drones, which added a huge amount to it. I mean, fantastic. And then there was satellite imagery of ice conditions. And so all that's a good thing. But from my point of view, it's also a bad thing because it took away the real sense of adventure. And having such a strong crew, again, that took away some of the sense of adventure. So that's a very personal view of it, comparing 2014 and 2025. When I went to Antarctica later in this circumnavigation, there'd been an 11-year gap, and I'd noticed significant changes in ice conditions. In Antarctica, there was a lot more ice in the water because it was coming off the land faster. There was still the cold winters, so the sea ice conditions were worse, and there was a lot more icebergs, etc. Last year, when we went through, there was an 11-year gap again between 2014 and 2025. It'd been a record warm winter and spring in the Arctic. And what that meant was that the first year ice conditions were very, very light because the ice hadn't built up. It hadn't built up in volume. It hadn't built up in thickness. And therefore, the multi-year ice to the north wasn't held back. So, when in 2014, when we went up the Baffin Island coast, we couldn't get to Pond Inlet until second week of August. Last year, we could have got to Pond Inlet in June. 2 months. Incredible. I think we saw a phenomena where the mild winter and spring and the lack of first year ice, fast ice, had not built up. And so on the eastern side of the Northwest Passage Arctic, the islands to the north was holding back the multi-year ice in the Arctic Ocean. Whereas on the western side, so Cambridge Bay onwards, or particularly Amundsen Gulf onwards, the first year ice had melted very quickly. There was a thin band that was navigable early, but the multi-year ice was being forced down from the Arctic Ocean.
After that storm, it was just such hard ice.
Yeah.
Thick.
So that made the second part of the trip really interesting. The bigger picture is that ice that was forced down was breaking up and melting. So that ice so we will see when they do an ice extent this year probably, that there's less ice in the Arctic Ocean. We've already lost, I don't know, statistics are something like 45% of the permanent ice in the Arctic Ocean. And we're not that far away where in the summer there won't be any ice at the North Pole.
Yeah, shocking. And that lack of ice obviously has an impact on the communities up in the Arctic. What have you seen in terms of changes there?
Well, a lot of the wildlife up there needs the ice to survive. Even the small creatures that live under the ice that feed the fish and the seals, and they feed the polar bears and so on and so forth. So what we're seeing, we know polar bears are under extreme stress. Walruses under extreme stress. Most of the creatures that rely on the ice are in trouble, which means that for the local communities, their land food is diminishing, but they still need to eat because it's incredibly expensive to live up in those Inuit communities. All the food has to be brought in. So, for centuries, they've relied on land food. They've relied on the ability to kill seals and walruses and polar bears and everything else. And so if there's less animals, but they still need, in fact, they need more now because they're having more children, et cetera, they're killing more. You bought a drone off a hunter that was using drones to find his prey, using drones to find polar bears. They used to paddle around in kayaks and harpoons. And so, the wildlife has been under pressure now since rifles were first introduced. And then you add into all the other changes, and now you add in the impact of climate change, the wildlife has got no chance at all. When I went through 2014, saw loads of polar bears, loads. You've seen some of the images. I mean, I was 3, 4 feet away from big male. And this time it was like, no polar bear. What did we see? Two?
Two polar bears, but we also saw nothing else really, not even
Yeah.
many marine mammals. The bird life, pretty much non-existent. The only bird life that sticks in my mind was that flock of birds going towards Cambridge Bay, where half of them, they're all on the water, half of them were dead. It was like a bird flu had gone through
Yeah.
the flock.
So, I mean, it's tragic. It's depressing. Uh, and, the impact on the wildlife means there's massive impact on the local communities. They're having to be more aggressive, change, move the odds more in their favor, which is it's a downward spiral.
We were also talking to Lonnie Dupre, who was talking about the impact on communities, particularly of there no longer being fast sea ice in the winters. So the isolation and the social issues that often causes as well. I don't know if you've witnessed any of that, Steve, in your times in the Arctic.
Sure. I mean, I was struck by the guy we spoke to Cambridge Bay. We went looking for gas, do you remember?
Yeah.
And he took one of these tinnies with two big engines, and he actually in the summertime visited the other communities. They had relatives living here, there, and everywhere. They used to do that in the winter. The lack of strong sea ice in the wintertime means it's dangerous, or they can't do it at all. And you sent me a WhatsApp to say that in Joehaven, your friend had said it was minus 56.
Mm.
I watched a documentary on the Chukchi Inuit, and this documentary was filming four guys in a car going from one community to the other, and it disappeared through the ice because the ice wasn't thick enough and they all died.
Oh, goodness.
And so, there's huge ramifications for climate change in the Arctic. I mean, temperature's rising there, I think, faster than anywhere else in the world.
I mean, what can you say? It's shocking. We were just passing through. They're having to adapt. We've seen adaptation in play already. A lot of the buildings that they're building are now being built with movable foundations so that they can cope with permafrost melting. We've seen it the way that they're adapting in terms of the hunting techniques and getting around with the new technology. In terms of your role as advisor, Steve, so Steve is one of our advisors on the Novara One Planet project. Tell us a little bit about what you consider to be your role and some of the things that you've worked on with us.
Well, I mean, the most obvious one, obviously, is to do with ongoing mentoring for the boat. That side of it is getting less and less now, as your experience develops as you get further up the learning curve. There's less call on my input.
Are
Still
we not at
some,
the top of the learning curve yet? Oh no.
not nowhere near.
Oh God.
I'm curious, Steve, as
No,
to what you think what we need to know yet.
well,
Well,
you know, when you sail long distances in different places, then there's different challenges. You found when you sailed across the Atlantic, for example, the impact of squalls. You've got the inside passages of British Columbia coming up. They're interesting. The tides, the currents are really strong. And then, some of the shallows on the Baja Peninsula getting into the lagoons, some of the sandbars that you're going to have coming up. And then you get into the Pacific and you've got coral and poor charts and coral bommies. And yeah, so it's going to be fun.
So coming back to the role as advisor, and some of the things you've helped us with.
Yeah, so the obviously the boat side of thing, so passage planning, just some sort of tips really, insights from 100,000 nautical miles of sailing. From the One Planet side of things, it's as today, the input was stick to the core, focus on the things that you originally set out to achieve. And by all means, pull in everything else, all the other experiences, etc. But in terms of the message that you're getting out, don't complicate it. So, there's that side of involvement from an advisory point of view in the One Planet project.
Yeah, brilliant. Steve, if you hadn't sold the boat to us, you said that you would have gone and worked with coastal communities anyhow. So, what is it that you would hope that we would achieve with the Novara One Planet project?
Before I even thought about selling the boat, it was to go and visit those remote communities in the Arctic and in the Pacific, and to get them to explain what they saw as the impact of climate change. And you did it in the Caribbean, you did it up in the Arctic with the Inuit communities. You made the point that there's been a lot of environmental stuff done from sailors, the citizen science and so forth. There's been a lot done on the wildlife, but very little, if anything, done on the impact to people. And I think so. What you're doing is what I originally intended, but you've taken it much further than I originally intended it would be. We need to get the message out there more, and so that's what we should work on together.
Steve, when we sat in the cockpit and did the deal about buying Novara, there
Yeah,
were two conditions. One is that you would come through the Northwest Passage, and the other is that you would join us when we sail into New Zealand. You still up
yep.
for that?
For me, it would be sort of sign off. I've kept my promise. I'm a great one for if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. So it would be ticking the box.
It would be wonderful. Wonderful to have you on board anytime. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve. Really lovely. And thank you so much for your support and inspiration over the last years and continuing support and inspiration.
It's been an absolute pleasure. It really has, and so far so good.
So far, so good. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. A huge thank you to Steve Brown for his time today. If you wish to learn more about the work Nigel and I are doing, then you can follow us on Instagram at Novara One Planet, on YouTube at Novara One Planet, or email us at novara.one.planet@gmail.com. Thanks again.